Following on from the previous video, the description of the remaining two defense mechanisms will be explained. Repudiation, or foreclosure, translated from the German word Verwerfung. Repudiation is a much more energetic and successful defensive modality than repression. It consists of the ego rejecting the unbearable representation together with its affection and behaving as if the representation had never appeared. It is a symbolic abolition of what should have been symbolized. Freud clearly stated that repression is something different from repudiation. He used the German word Verwerfung to describe such mechanism, which however does not appear again as a specific defense mechanism after the case history of the Wolfman. As mentioned previously, repudiation or foreclosure, as the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan called it, is a specific defense mechanism underlying psychotic phenomena. The German word Verwerfung refers to the action of throwing something out. Repudiation actually mainly consists of a primal rejection of a perception, which is thrown out of the symbolic universe of the subject. Repudiation differs from repression in two ways. 1. The rejected perception does not leave a mark in the subject's unconscious and therefore is not included in it as a symbol. 2. The rejected perception does not return from the inner world, but from the external, especially in the form of hallucinations. The mechanism behind repudiation is not a simple projection. The sensation that is suffocated inside is not projected outwardly. Rather, what is cancelled inside returns from the outside. Something suppressed inside, which means not symbolized, returns from the external reality. Repudiation attempts to refute the evidence of a traumatic perception, but the process prevents the proper functioning of the primal repression, with the consequent rejection at the level of the primary process of something that should have been symbolized or metaphorized. This phenomenon points to the thorny question of whether or not unbearable reality leaves marks in the psyche. The effect of the defense mechanism of repudiation is to prevent the constitution of the definitive reality ego. Repudiation implies the impossibility on the part of the ego to judge the existence of a traumatic reality, i.e., castration, as if it had never happened. While the pleasure ego has the function to attribute a property to a thing of the world through a judgment of attribution, the definitive reality ego decides regarding the existence or non-existence of a representation in the external reality through a judgment of existence. The pleasure ego wants to introject everything good and to throw out from itself everything bad. On the contrary, the definitive reality ego, which develops from the pleasure ego, has the function of issuing judgments of existence in order to be able to accept the perceived reality, and thus guarantee the examination of reality. In repudiation, the evaluating function of the definitive reality ego is impaired. The ego cannot judge the existence of a traumatic perception, which finally results as non-existent. Example. When I was 5 years old, I was playing in the garden near my nurse and carving with my pocket knife in the bark of one of the walnut trees that comes into my dream. Suddenly, to my unspeakable terror, I noticed I had cut through the little finger of my hand, so that it was only hanging by its skin. I felt no pain but great fear, and did not say anything to my nurse, who was only a few paces distant. But I sank down on the nearest seat and sat incapable of casting another glance at my finger. At last I calmed down, took a look at the finger, and saw that it was entirely uninjured. In this case, the famous case of the wolf man, the hallucination of the cut finger illustrates the difficulty of conceiving of the penis as a symbol of the difference between the sexes. The crux of the matter lies precisely in the fact that the return occurred in the form of a hallucinatory realization. It would have been different if the wolfman had dreamt to have cut his finger, as he would have then been able to express in a symbolic form what had happened to him. We are faced with the repetition, beyond a pleasure principle, of a childhood trauma that cannot be symbolized. Disavow. Verleugnung. The traumatic perception is unbearable precisely because it is irreconcilable with an unconscious representation of a wish. Given such a conflict of the ego with reality, instead of the internal representation being repressed, which represents the mechanism of neurosis, it is the perception of reality that is invalidated by means of negative hallucination. Negative hallucination means that the subject does not perceive the traumatic reality, and in the freed space created by the lacking perception, locates the desired unconscious representation in the form of positive hallucination. However, not always from a negative hallucination or from a not knowing before a traumatic reality does psychosis take place. Other evolutions can occur, and fetishism is among them. Disavowal is the defense mechanism related to a splitting of the ego, which is at the base of fetishism. It is a mechanism that involves a vertical splitting in which one side of the ego accepts the traumatic perception while the other side rejects it. Despite this rejection of a traumatic perception, this mechanism does not lead to psychosis. Part of the ego does not recognize an undoubtedly substantial and traumatic fragment of reality, as the fetishist does when facing the perception of a woman's lack of a penis. However, another tendency accepts it, so that the attitude according to wish and the attitude according to reality coexist side by side. Within the fetishist's mental life, only one tendency rejects the unpleasant fact. In the case of the mechanism underlying psychosis, or repudiation, one of these tendencies, the one in line with reality, would indeed be lacking. The fetishist does not contradict his perception by hallucinating a penis where none was seen, as a psychotic would do, but undertakes a displacement of value, thus transferring the meaning of the penis to another part of the body or to an object. This is precisely what resolves the conflict and prevents him from hallucinating the missing penis. The fetish is the substitute for the woman's, mother's penis in which the boy has believed existed and that he does not want to renounce. Thus, fetishism represents an alternative to the normal outcome of the Oedipus complex, that is, its destruction. An important detail that marks a difference between disavowal and repudiation should not go unnoticed. The former involves a sense of belief or confusion and introduces the subject to the universe of doubt, uncertainty, illusion, and magic. The latter is accompanied by an unmistakable feeling of certainty. Fetishists do not feel certain to perceive a hallucinated reality that is not there. Rather, they believe they see what there is not. They are in the realms of beliefs, not hallucinations. Example. I told a patient I'd been analysing for 3 years that in 1 month I would be moving from Rome to another city, and that I would be happy to continue his treatment through Skype. I informed him again a week prior to leaving, and also at our last face-to-face session. However, a few minutes after the first scheduled Skype session was supposed to start, instead of seeing him appear on the screen, I received a phone call from him in which he told me that he was waiting for me outside my front door in Rome and that he had been ringing the doorbell with no answer. When I asked him if he remembered that I had relocated, the patient answered that he remembered perfectly. This patient's attitude, according to his desire, that I would not relocate, and his attitude according to reality, coexisted side by side in that the patient also knew that I had told him about my move. Within his mental life, only one tendency had rejected the unpleasant fact.
This concludes these short videos, which are the result of several years of teaching online the post-Freudian theory course. They are designed for people who want to approach psychoanalysis and have no prior training. For this reason, I have only used technical terms that have been previously explained, and I strongly recommend following the class's chronological sequence. As the title of these videos suggests, they are a survey of Freud theories. I am aware that an accurate understanding of Freud's thought requires at least a couple of decades of intensive reading. Therefore, my intention is to provide listeners with conceptual tools that will allow them to delve into the topics that will interest them the most. One of the most interesting aspects of psychoanalysis is the richness of meanings of each paper, and the possibility of reading it many times, each time taking different aspects and points of view. I hope that I will have the chance to further explore those topics in class with the students.